Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute. Today's program is called Proud Hawaiians, Loyal Americans. Oftentimes today, in the midst of such political controversy taking place in our islands, it's hard for people, whether Hawaiian or non-Hawaiian, to understand what Hawaiian identity is all about. I'm glad that there's an emerging generation of young men and women who are willing to speak out about their identity, and today I have two of them on our program, and I think you're going to enjoy meeting them. The first is Kainoa Castillo, who happens to be a student at the University of Hawaii, and he's very involved politically, trying to shape the future of Hawaii. Kainoa, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Always glad to have you. The other guest is very dear to me. Patty and I have known her all her life. She's my daughter, Jenai Akina, a student at Harvard University who's back for holiday now. Jenai, welcome to the program.
Hi, Dad.
Well, this feels like the dinner table, having Kainoa over for dinner. And you know, both of you have thought long and hard about what it is to be Hawaiian, what it is to be American. And I just thought I'd throw it to you right away, Kainoa. You've traveled quite a bit. Your family is going to be actually moving back to the mainland. And for you, what does it mean to be a Hawaiian?
For me, to be Hawaiian, I think it just means to hold a certain core values. One of those main values to me is the spirit of aloha, and you know, just sharing kindness and everything with everyone, unity, bringing everybody together. The spirit of aloha, that's what I part-time taught Hawaiian studies to elementary students here in the islands.
Right here in the Department of Education, you've been a teacher.
Education. That just finished 2 weeks ago, and that's what I shared with them, that the spirit of aloha is actually state law here in Hawaii, and it's just caring for one another, bringing the people together.
Do you ever feel that there's any contradiction between being a Hawaiian and being an American, especially in light of some of the controversy taking place over sovereignty?
I don't think there's any necessarily any conflict between being a Hawaiian and an American. I think it's just pretty much, you know, if you were a Chinese American and everything, you hold certain values, and you have certain you know, cultural things that you'd like to share with the rest of America. And I mean, when I eventually move away to the mainland, I hope I could take a part of Hawaii up to the mainland when I move there this fall.
Well, you're an ambassador in many ways. Jenai, you've had the opportunity to live on the mainland for 2 years up in the Boston area. You're going to China this summer and will be going back to represent the United States as a student delegate to the APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. What do you carry with you into all of these environments from your Hawaiian heritage?
Well, having gone to Kamehameha schools for 9 years, I think I was blessed to be able to go there and receive the education that I did. But something that I drew from going there is that being a Hawaiian is having a strong foundation in who you are, as having a cultural identity and having a strong heritage. And that's something that I realized when I went off to the mainland, because there are people there that don't have such a strong cultural background, don't have such a strong identity in what their ethnicity is. And so it's something to be proud of as a Hawaiian. So that's something that I take as a Hawaiian wherever I go, and whether it be China, whether it be Boston. But more importantly, as Kainoa was saying, in terms of having a strong value system, something that is important to me that I identify as being a Hawaiian is pursuing excellence. Hawaiians were excellent fishers, farmers, leaders. In every position that they did, they developed to the very best, and I think that's what we can take as Hawaiians in today's society.
Well, you know, that's very interesting because there are often stereotypes, Hawaiian time, lazy Hawaiian, and so forth, which really don't reflect what you pointed out about the excellence that is admired within Hawaiian culture. But this sounds a lot like the things that are valued in our American culture, in the culture that comes from the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and the country that has really given birth to the most powerful movement for freedom and democracy. Do you see similarities?
Yeah, definitely. I think being an American, if anything, empowers my identity as a Hawaiian as well. Having rights and being able to protect those rights, being able to speak out and express myself in certain ways, that's what it means to be an American, but that's also what it means to be a Hawaiian as well.
Thank you. Kainoa, what would be some of those qualities that we could say are both Hawaiian and American? I know you've thought a lot about this because you are very much involved in organizations and movements that represent being Hawaiian and represent the further protection of the Constitution and the advancement of democracy, the pride of being an American. So what would you find in common between being American and being Hawaiian?
Let's see. I would say, just what Jenai shared, the pursuit of excellence. How she said we were excellent farmers and excellent fishermen. And then just like Americans, they're excellent, lawyers, doctors, all that kind of stuff. To excel in your specific field that you go into. And one that I felt that the Hawaiians shared excellence is sustainability in a way. Farmers, fishermen, the ahupua'a system. I know there are other aspects to it, like the political aspects of it, but what really gets me about the Hawaiian ahupua'a system is the sustainability of it. The Hawaiians had the ability to feed its people on the land, and currently we are in that situation of going on a sustainability trend. And could you just imagine how much better Hawaii's economic situation would be if we could achieve some form of food sustainability? I think 90% of our food is imported. I think that accounts to close to $6 billion. Some form of sustainability would keep some money here in the islands.
Well, that's a good point, and that's a very good area, sustainability, building the economic infrastructure, agriculture, aquaculture, food production. For talking about values that are in common between Hawaiian culture and American enterprise. In fact, both of you have mentioned excellence, and I can't help but think of the Olelo no Iao, the Hawaiian statement or phrase, kulia ikanu'u, strive to reach the summit. A lot of people would be surprised to learn that achievement and becoming one's very best are very much part of the Hawaiian culture. And there's another one. You're talking about farming, working the ahupua'a, or the unit for agricultural and economic production. Hawaiians had no place for laziness in their culture. So it's really ironic that today we associate that word lazy with Hawaiian. There's an old saying taught to me by one of my kupuna, Nona Beamer, who taught me how to chant and to dance many, many years ago. Mai maka'uika hana, don't fear work. Maka'uika moloa, fear laziness. So in many ways, there's this cultural value. And having Jenai been raised in two cultures, the Hawaiian and the American culture, what advantages come to you, especially now that you're traveling internationally and also across the country?
Advantages. Well, it's going to be interesting in the coming months as I go off to China for the very first time and being around people from all different kinds of countries. And I need to remember, I suppose, what it means to be an American, what it means to be a Hawaiian. And there's a sense of pride there. But in terms of advantages, I guess what we've been echoing this entire time, just remembering the roots of my culture and what, as an American and Hawaiian, and what it means in other countries as well. Yeah.
Kainoa, you're very active in the political scene. You've worked on political campaigns for a variety of candidates. You are involved, if I can say, you're leading a group, the College Republicans, and more than once people have remarked that just doesn't go together, a Hawaiian man and the College Republican. So you kind of defy stereotype in a sense, but in reality, you believe very strongly in American values. Yes. What are some of those American values? What are some of those things that you believe and you stand for?
Okay. Well, I'll quickly share that there was a Hawaiian Republican, Prince Kuhio.
There you go.
So, the number one thing is, the pursuit of the American dream. I believe with a little hard work that you really can, achieve all that you set yourself out for. Eventually, I'd like to own a home of my own, where I could raise my family. And I don't believe that it's going to be handed to me, I believe that I'm going to have to work hard. In my case, I eventually like to build my own businesses, and I feel that that would set myself up financially, and in order for me to achieve my dream of owning my own home, raising my family, that way. So the American dream.
Well, yes, those are American values. Private property ownership, something that is embedded within our Constitution. The opportunity to operate a business, free market enterprise, the free market in which we're able to have competitive free enterprise, and people can achieve whatever they want to achieve. And these seem to be things that you value greatly. Do you see these things as being practiced by or these things as being consistent with Hawaiian culture?
I would think so. Well, I mean, I do have a small business of my own, and I try to implement Hawaiian culture in it as much as I can. I mean, well, the name of the company does have a Hawaiian word in it itself. It's got kupu and development, so growth and development. What it tries to do is just, it grows. What I envision it doing is helping and growing the individuals and the businesses that are already trying to better Hawaii. So I believe, Hawaiian values of taking care of each other and unity and all that. So it's kind of culture is implemented in what I currently am doing. So
you mentioned your desire to build a business, your desire to own a home, and you made a reference to a very interesting phrase. You don't want anything handed to you. In other words, would it be safe to say you don't see the pathway to the American or the Hawaiian dream as being one that primarily promotes entitlements or being taken care of and so forth? Now, that's a very robust philosophy. And it's not in keeping with much of the political tone in our state now, which is arguing that the pathway to advance Hawaiians is a pathway of gaining more rights, gaining more entitlements from the federal government, from the state government, from private trusts, and so forth. Jenai, what do you think about the real pathway for the advancement of the Hawaiian people? You have siblings, you have friends and others who are on a pathway toward achievement. Do you think that achievement is really primarily gaining more entitlements, more rights, more welfare opportunities?
Not necessarily. I think that, as we spoke before in the Olelo No'ea that you brought up, what it means to strive for the summit is to move forward in levels of education and leadership and pursue those ways of developing yourself and your society. So I think that's what Hawaiians need to embrace the most, and that's how we're going to forward our society today, by taking up those levels of leadership.
Oftentimes, Kainoa, and I know you've studied Hawaiian history, people look back to the 19th century and say Hawaiians were disadvantaged by the coming of the West and did not have much opportunity. But you mentioned Prince Kuhio, and would it not be correct to recognize that Hawaiians had become literate, had become part of the mainstream of society, that there were government officials, there were bankers, there were business people and so forth who were practicing the very values you're talking about, achieving excellence and so forth, that there was nothing preventing them from doing that for those who would actually take their education seriously, work hard, and really pursue a life of achievement?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I know during my time at the university, I did take Hawaiian studies classes, and then like you shared that they did have, I think it was pretty much 100% literacy rate, right? The entire population was able to read, and then that, of course, reflects back into education, like Jenai shared. Further your education, and then you further all the opportunities that you could take a hold of.
And striving, as you put it, again, Jenai, to reach the summit, which is important. What advice would you have, before we break for a few moments here, to young Hawaiians who are aspiring to make it in the world? What would you tell them?
I would say, don't be afraid, like you said, don't be afraid to go after something that you're truly passionate about. Don't be afraid to excel in something you may be good at. And I think I realized this the most having gone away for college is that I don't know where I would have been if I had stayed and maybe not as developed my education as well, and maybe stayed within a closed-minded island mindset. And I think for the future, for young Hawaiians, I think that wherever you go and whichever college you choose to go to, just don't be afraid to, really work hard and pursue something.
Well, one of the things I find refreshing about you, Jenai and Kainoa, is whatever life has dealt you, you choose to take life by the horns and make your own future. Neither of you is saying, I had a very terrible father. I had this disadvantage. My people experienced an overthrow more than 100 years ago. Regardless of whatever in the past there may have been, you're very much focused on the future. Is it safe to say you don't consider yourselves victims, but you see great opportunity ahead? Well, and that's really what the United States represents for all people, and why I'm proud to know an emerging generation of young Hawaiians who are proud to be Hawaiian, but also loyal to all the things that America at its very best stands for. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute. We'll be right back after this short message on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Don't go away.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Yamashita, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And Urban Transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Thank you.
Welcome back to E Hana Kako, which means let's work together. The title was chosen based upon a very common saying that says let's pray together, E Pule Kako, but we say at the Grassroots Institute, E Hana Kako, and I want to say thanks also now to Jay Fidel, producer of ThinkTech Hawaii, the broadcast network. You can find this program and many others at www.thinktechhawaii.com. Now back to today's subject, which is proud Hawaiians, loyal Americans. No contradiction between the two. I'm delighted to be with Kainoa Castillo and Jenai Akina, representatives of a young, emerging generation who are going to, I think, change the world. Now, you said during the break that you had some questions for me, and as long as I can throw back to you and get you talking, I'm delighted. And maybe, Kainoa, well, go ahead, grill me if you want to, but keep the conversation going.
Okay, sounds good. So I know that you've shared before that you believe in unity of all people of Hawaii. That's Hawaiians and non-Hawaiians alike. And that I think you've shared too before that in the Hawaiian kingdom there was no separation of, if you have Hawaiian blood or if you're not. Can you share with the viewers that really why you believe in the unity for all?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, especially today. Unity is an American value. We have on our coinage e pluribus unum, from the many, one. There's great diversity in our country. We come from all places across the world, but we come together as one, and so we're on equal footing before the law. This is constitutional, that no one has any greater advantage or disadvantage based upon race. This is so very important. What people may be surprised to learn is that was true in the Hawaiian kingdom. From the time of the first monarch of Hawaii, King Kamehameha I, to the last monarch, Queen Liliuokalani, citizenship was never based upon race, and that astounds people. People somehow have this historical amnesia about that. In reality, there were Chinese, Japanese, Caucasians, others in the kingdom. And so I think it's very important to understand that unity, citizenship based upon where your heart is and your loyalty to the country, is the Hawaiian value for citizenship and the American value as well. And so I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, when you're talking about that and how citizenship is a lot the definition is a lot broader than what people think today. Why is there such anger among certain groups today who, when they hear the fact that to be a Hawaiian is much broader than your blood, or you're having Hawaiian blood? Why do you think there's a controversy between that? Do you think that certain Hawaiian groups feel like they're losing a part of their culture when they start including more people into it?
Well, I think that it's very important to go back and be historically accurate. There are a lot of people who unfortunately believe that Hawaiians were like an Indian tribe, that they were a homogenous group ethnically and politically, and that in 1893, when Queen Liliuokalani abdicated the throne, there was a tribe that was displaced from whom lands and so forth were taken. The reality is Hawaiians were citizens of all ethnic backgrounds who were part of a constitutional monarchy. And this wasn't something imposed upon them. This is something that the Hawaiians themselves had developed from the time of Kamehameha I on through Queen Liliuokalani. This was the very essence of the Hawaiian Constitution, which in 1840 stated that there were no ethnic divisions between people. And so the first thing I'd have to say is that part of the anger, and I want to be sympathetic toward it because it's an authentic emotion, part of it is based upon misinformation. And I say that gently because I'm not saying that someone's responsible for having believed something that's not true, but the truth does matter. The truth, when we go back and actually tell history correctly, matters. I think there's a second reason also for the anger, and that is when you start with an untrue premise that the Hawaiians were like a native Indian tribe and had everything taken away from them, then that fits very easily with a mindset of victimization. When we conceive of ourselves as victims, that is to say, whatever conditions we have in life, our economic conditions, our political conditions, our social opportunities, if we see ourselves as victims, there's always a victimizer. Mm-hmm. And whenever you parse things in terms of there are victims and a victimizer, you put into those categories victims, the Hawaiians, the victimizers, whatever you put into there. And whether you put the Christian missionaries, whether you put Western emissaries, whether you put the United States of America. And so I think the very way we structure it, if we allow these two false premises, one, that the Hawaiians were a homogenous tribe, and number two, that we are victims, then it automatically creates anger. And so one of the most important things we have to do to deal with the anger is to start with truth. Mm-hmm. And when we start with truth, we begin to realize that history has given tremendous opportunity to Hawaiians. Mm-hmm. And the United States' role today helps to assure that those opportunities are guaranteed by law as rights, and that everyone is on an equal footing moving forward. That can help allay some of the anger. One of the things I've seen is that when people are very much focused on the future, upon achievement, upon accomplishment, that anger dissolves. Mm-hmm. That they see possibility and opportunity. And organizations like the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, I feel, and the state of Hawaii's government as well, can do so much good by focusing on how all people can achieve through education, through economic opportunity, better jobs, through better health. And when we look at that, we're so busy, as you said, kulia ikanuku, striving to achieve the summit, that we're not angry. We don't see ourselves as victims.
So it seems like there's what you're saying is there's a misperception of there being an in-group and an out-group, and the tensions between that, and in reality there's really just one group in society that you're trying to promote. What do you think this has, or what are the implications you think this has in terms of the sovereignty movement in Hawaii, or the sovereignty movements in Hawaii?
Well, you mentioned anger earlier. There's a factual side of history, but then again there's an emotional side that we have to look at, and I think both are important. I'd say on the factual side, whatever may have happened, in 1898 and in 1893, two seminal years, the 1893 being the abdication of the throne by Queen Liliuokalani, and then 1898, the transition of government into the territorial United States relationship. Whatever may have happened prior to that or that led up to it, there is a great deal of disagreement. Now, putting that aside, even if we were to assume for a moment that there was injustice, there is a very practical question that has to be addressed, that the law must address, and that is, what do we do about it? And people have proposed going back to 1893, or even earlier, but 1893, and restoring the kingdom as a sovereign nation. But here's a fundamental problem. If we were to give back lands, if we were to give back resources to whoever was in power in 1898 or 1893 at the end of the Hawaiian Kingdom, who would it be that we'd give it back to? Fundamentally, it would not be the native Hawaiian people, because the citizens of that kingdom were citizens from all ethnicities in a constitutional monarchy. You'd have to give it back to, yes, Bernice Pauahi Bishop, the princess, but also to Charles Reed Bishop, who happened to be her husband, who was purely Caucasian. Because Hawaii, and this is actually worth celebrating, Hawaii was a multi-ethnic citizenry. So here's a legal anomaly we have that has to do with sovereignty. If you claim, even if you accept that there was some injustice, there is no entity to give it back to. There is no native Hawaiian entity that was in power at that time and that has remained in power, and that if we were to restore the kingdom to what it was, it would be a multi-ethnic kingdom. This is very important to understand. That's the logic side. But there's the other side of it. How do we do justice? The question of justice has a legal component, but it also has to do with how do we restore some sense of fairness, some sense of righteousness, that we are being, as we say in Hawaiian, pono. It's for this reason I think that we need to find solutions, but those solutions are not going to be a legal sovereign nation. They're not going to be an arbitration per se, but there are ways in which people can have mediation with one another. It's kind of like a marriage. There's a legal question as to the status of the marriage, but a marriage is always far more than a legal document. There's also the emotional, social, spiritual side. And I think that organizations like the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, as well as the leaders of groups such as the Ali'i Trusts, as well as all people in the state of Hawaii, need to settle the legal question and realize that there is no going backward, and now move forward and have a social, spiritual mediation kind of relationship with one another, in which we seek, first and foremost, what Queen Liliuokalani prayed for in the Queen's Prayer. She prayed, "Dear Lord Keakua, do not look upon the sins of these men who have brought her harm," she felt, "but forgive." And with that, we can begin the process. With that, we can also have constructive remedies to conditions that Hawaiians experience, such as what you've experienced, Jenai, the Kamehameha schools, a private trust along with other trusts that actually help to benefit Hawaiians through education. This doesn't require a sovereign nationhood. This is the will of two individuals in their private trust who've done tremendous good for Hawaiians. And so I know I've given you a rather long answer to this question, but I think that going backward, there's going to be no solution on the legal side. Sovereignty is not a solution. And going forward, there are many remedies that we need to become more aggressive in.
I think this goes right into our next question for you. You said promoting certain solutions. Let's just imagine if you were to hold elected office, if it was state government or the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. How would you address the Hawaiians that feel that they are victims of the overthrow, and what would you propose? What kind of solutions, as a lawmaker or as a policymaker, what kind of policies would you promote to better the social or economic status of these Hawaiians?
Well, I think there are so many wonderful opportunities today for the entire state to work together to build the quality of life of Native Hawaiians and all people. The first thing I'd say is this. You can't solve the problem of any one people in isolation. We don't live in isolation on a reservation. You can't have a benefit structure that goes out and identifies somebody who has some quantum of Hawaiian blood and expect to change their condition or the conditions of others. Let me give you an example. You can go all through an area that has a high Hawaiian population, Nanakuli Waianae Coast, and you can find all the Hawaiians there through a great deal of hard work, people who may have native Hawaiian blood, and you can give them job training. Okay, but the problem is this: if you don't create jobs on the entire coast with businesses that involve people and have an education and transportation system and so forth, all that job training is going to go to waste. And so one of the first things that I think can be done is to stop isolating Hawaiians through a benefits program based on blood, and instead, let's go out and regenerate areas economically. And you'll reach more Hawaiians actually doing that, but you will also have the byproduct of not separating people from one another. That's one solution. Let me give you another one. I could go on all day with them. Another one is to restore the power of private property ownership. This is very important. Take state-run organizations that specifically target Hawaiians, like the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. Quite apart from the levels of corruption and inefficiency that have been clearly documented in the last year in the Star Advertiser and elsewhere, just the whole concept actually works against becoming a victor. It actually perpetuates victimization. Every ethnic group in Hawaii knows that the American dream is to get private property, a home, build on that, and hand it to your heirs. The Chinese have done that and done that very well. Caucasians have done that. Japanese have done that. Do you know the one ethnic group in Hawaii who has bought the lie that the American dream, the Hawaiian dream, is to stand in line 20, 30, 40 years, maybe get a piece of property that you can lease, and then when your grandchildren drop below the blood quantum, you lose it? There's only one ethnic group. My heart breaks. And that is Hawaiians. You see, we've got to fix that. The Great Mahele in the 19th century was a vision to see private property in the hands of every Hawaiian, so that Hawaiians would be just as Americans were in America. They'd have their castle. They could build wealth. But unfortunately, the Hawaiian Homelands Act decided this is going to stay in the government. So we'll only let Hawaiians lease it. That should be an outrage, because we know globally across the world, and Grassroots Institute has accessed the research for studies that show in developing nations, one of the key factors for economic prosperity of the people and the nation is private property ownership. It's also a right for us. This is what our founding fathers meant when they said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness didn't mean playing video games. It meant the ability to fulfill your dreams through private property ownership and entrepreneurship. And if we can somehow allow the leasehold owners on Hawaiian homestead land to purchase or acquire their leases or fees, to have fee simple land, that will empower them, because that will give them the capacity to produce wealth. That will also reduce their need to be welfare beneficiaries, because they'd be able to produce wealth. That's a powerful, powerful thing. And then there would be equal footing with all Americans in that sense. So these are just two proposals of many that can give us creative ways of empowering Hawaiians without creating any discriminatory practices against non-Hawaiians.
Going off of what you said about how Hawaii really isn't isolated in itself, and we shouldn't isolate certain groups. On a global scale, do you see Hawaii, or how do you see Hawaii interacting with other countries or presenting itself in the global community?
That's a great question, and I actually should be asking you that question, because you two are the ones who are going to be building that future. But it raises an important point. Hawaii has a tremendous opportunity to be a gateway to the rest of the world for the United States. We already have an affinity with most of Asia and definitely all of Polynesia. We're not using that to the best advantage. Well, one of the important things that we have to recognize is that the Hawaiian Kingdom itself had diplomatic relations with the vast majority of nations in the 19th century. We were the shipping hub of the Pacific, and we were well known with embassies across the world. Well, that heritage doesn't disappear. When you're dealing with an entity such as China, you're not just dealing with post-cultural revolution Communist Party, you're also dealing with an entity that conceives of itself in terms of a 6,000-year-long history, some of which involved a relationship with Hawaii that predates its relationship with the United States. This is an interesting thing. This is where we here in the state of Hawaii can take advantage of the Hawaiian heritage and the Hawaiian history. This is very, very important. And when we see the harmonious relationship between Hawaiian history and our United States identity, we can recover the vision of becoming a shipping hub of the Pacific. There are ways to do that, but perhaps on another show I can talk about modifications to a federal law called the Jones Act. But in addition to that, we can resume the global ambassadorial role that we had. Take, for example, our relationship with China. The Washington-Beijing Bridge is fraught with posturing all the time. We go over there and have to say to the world that China's human rights policies needs to change. China says to us, well, we own you, so when you pay us back, we'll listen, and so forth. So there's all this posturing going on. For cultural, educational purposes, Hawaii can be a phenomenal backdoor, a phenomenal bridge. And that's speaking to the similitude between the place international relations had with the Hawaiian Kingdom and the place it must have now with the United States through this state and its rich historical heritage. These are good questions. We'll come back and ask you some questions too. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, and my guests today, Kainoa Castillo and Jenai Akina, are doing a wonderful job of representing Hawaii here and across the country and into the rest of the world. Don't go away. We'll come back for our final segment on E Hana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Aloha.
I'm Jay Fidel. That's Sharon Moriwaki of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. And every Wednesday we have Hawaii, the state of clean energy. We've been doing it for some time now, and we have some fantastic guests on there, unbelievable guests who give us insight into what is going on in a very complex, sometimes very confusing, sometimes very disappointing area of progress in the state. So we love doing this. We love meeting them. We love talking to them. We love having their ideas out on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we can all make some sense of what's going on. Sharon, what do you think?
I think that's absolutely correct. We enjoy ourselves meeting with all these people and hearing about the energy and the state of clean energy, and hopefully we advance clean energy for the state. So it's terrific. Join us.
Okay, it's every Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday is Energy Day. Every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Hawaii, the state of clean energy, here on ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll see you there. I'm Jake.
Aloha and welcome back to E Hana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Again, I want to give kudos to Jay Fidel and the entire team at ThinkTech Hawaii. You do a great job of getting information out across the world and bringing some focus here to Hawaii. Our program today, Proud Hawaiians, Loyal Americans, is one in which I've got two examples of that very concept, two emerging leaders amongst many here in the state of Hawaii and across the country, Jenai Akina and Kainoa Castillo. And we're going to just wrap up some of the thoughts that we've had today. Kainoa, I know you've thought long and hard about the tension that is taking place here in Hawaii, and it's so tense, this concept of a separate sovereign nation of Native Hawaiians, the relationship to the United States and so forth. And I'm sure you're in the midst of it, not only politically, but in terms of feelings of friends and relatives and so forth. What do you make of all of this? And I'm not really so much asking a constitutional or a technical question, but more in terms of the harmony and peace and society that we want to have here in Hawaii.
Well, I do share similar views like you do as well, Dr. Akina. I feel that if we laid a certain foundation for the rest of our Hawaiians, those that feel victimized of the overthrow and all that, that if we provided like an educational foundation, I feel, again, I feel that with just a little hard work, I'll be able to achieve what I want to do. And that's kind of what I encouraged the elementary school that I taught at, Lanakila Elementary. I had the opportunity to be their graduation guest speaker. And what I encourage them to do is to commit themselves to being lifelong learners and leaders. And if you just commit yourself to being a lifelong learner, whatever area you would like to, I told them we need leaders in medicine and education and government, and just to remember that learning is not limited to the classroom. To take an active role like I did, such volunteering on campaigns, taking official roles on campaigns, and just really expanding your learning outside of the classroom. I mean, if you want to go Hawaiian, then get your hands dirty in the lo'i patch or something like that. So it's just really expand the learning, and really educational, I believe, is the tool to...
Absolutely. And you know, by the way, you're absolutely right that one of the ways to be Hawaiian is to get into the taro patch, the lo'i patch, but also to go to Silicon Valley and work on a high-tech navigational system for navigating canoes and actual shuttlecraft beyond the atmosphere, because the Hawaiian culture was never static, but it was also moving forward. But I hear what you're saying. What you're saying then is, for the advancement of the Hawaiian people, the solution does not rest in the political sovereignty realm. Mm-hmm. It rests in seizing these opportunities we have in the United States for education, for advancement, for entrepreneurship, and so forth. And that's how you conceive of your future. Yes. Jenai, your thoughts? Because you've got many friends who are split on the question of sovereignty. Mm-hmm. Different feelings that they've had. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of misinformation as well. And any reflections you may have on the issue?
I guess what I would hope for those who are angry, who do feel strongly about these issues, is first and foremost step out of, how we were saying, the mindset of victimization, and understand the opportunities that we have being both Hawaiians and both Americans, the opportunities we have to gain more education and go into levels of leadership where we can improve Hawaii as a whole. And I think just continuing to move forward, as we've said.
Yes, in fact, very important word, imua, to go forward rather than to go backward. And with that, we've got a couple minutes left, and I'm going to ask our guests maybe to give a seminal last minute comment. But I hope you've enjoyed watching today. It's been one of the more fun shows I've done, not just because my daughter's here, which is most enjoyable indeed, but because I think that these young people represent a majority of Hawaii's talented young men and women who see the future as moving forward with our common American and Hawaiian heritage, as opposed to regretting the past and resolving problems as we move toward building a better Hawaii and better individual lives and families. Kainoa, any last words you'd like to say to our audience before we go?
I'd just like to encourage them that I personally believe that Hawaii has this untapped economic potential, and just once we start excelling educationally and just raising the next generation of leaders, then we'll excel economically. How Hawaii was such a strategic point in military-wise before, I think now, 21st century, Hawaii plays a key strategic point economically. So,
very good, and I hope you'll be running for some office someday.
Someday, hopefully.
You'll have my vote and support. Jenai, any last words?
Well, I guess all I can say is that I've had a very unique opportunity as partly being your daughter, to view a lot of these issues in Hawaii through a very interesting lens, a lens that I don't think everyone has the opportunity to see things through. But I'm excited to see where Hawaii goes in the coming years, in the coming decades, as new leaders emerge, as our young people, the people our age, actually take up positions in leadership. And I'm very hopeful for where Hawaii goes.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kainoa, and thank you, Jenai. I'm glad you were able to be on the program. Well, we've been talking with emerging young leaders, and I think that as we move forward, our future is really going to be in how well we cultivate and develop these young leaders. And I personally hope, I know that ThinkTech Hawaii does and the Grassroots Institute does, that these young leaders can truly experience e pluribus unum, from the many, which is all our diversity, one. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, saying thanks to Jay Fidel and the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Until next week, much aloha.